We are back, and we are joined now by Austin Kocher, professor at Syracuse University, a political and legal geographer studying immigration enforcement. And you can find him over on Substack, austinkocher.substack. I've now sent this around to family members who are trying to keep up with the insanity of the Trump administration. Your work over there is essential. So thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I love the show.
Oh, well, very kind of you. Appreciate that. I want to start here because this is just one of the many horrific stories that we're seeing. Stephen Monticelli over at the Texas Observer just keeps doing great work. And he uncovered this yesterday, or at least published this piece yesterday. It's a piece entitled "ICE Prosecutor in Dallas Runs a White Supremacist X Account." And the posts are as follows. This is apparently a guy who it went on the radar that he might have been a part of ICE enforcement or a member or somebody in the government when he was bragging on Twitter about, yeah, I'm at the courthouse waiting on warrants, etc. But these were some of his posts prior to that. These were but the latest posts that Glomar Responder, that's the name of this account, has made over the years that suggest the operator of the account is an ICE employee. Glomar Responder has also routinely expressed blatantly racist and anti-immigrant views. Through an extensive review of this account's posts, publicly available documents, and other social media profiles and posts, the Texas Observer has identified the operator of Glomar Responder as James Jim Joseph Rodden, a 44-year-old who works as an assistant chief counsel for ICE in the Dallas area. He represents the agency in immigration court hearings where judges decide whether an individual is removed from the country. Now, here are some of his posts. America is a white nation founded by whites. Our country should favor us. All blacks are foreign to my people, dumb F. Freedom of association hasn't existed in this country since 1964 at the absolute latest, he wrote, talking about the Civil Rights Act. He also said, I'm not a commie, I'm a fascist. Fascists solve communist problems. Get your insults right, R-word. He also said migrants are all criminals, he posted. It is our holy duty to guard against the foreign hordes. Nobody is proposing feeding migrants into tree shredders yet. Give it a few more weeks at this level of invasion, and that will be the moderate position. Below that is some racism about Asian people, etc. I mean, it's you could go on and on. This is the mentality. And that's why I wanted to start here with you, Austin. Does this kind of open white supremacy from somebody who gleefully is involved in these ICE raids, does this surprise you?
You know, it's not surprising. We've seen lots of examples of this out of Border Patrol and other parts of the enforcement wing of the Department of Homeland Security. Unfortunately, these agencies, because of their rhetoric at the national level and also the mission of the agencies, which, these are agencies that are really struggle with responsible oversight. They're constantly trying to get out of oversight. They're constantly trying to avoid being transparent to the public. I can tell you, as someone who's sent a lot of FOIA requests to these agencies, it's very difficult to get information back. And even a high-ranking person inside one of these agencies a couple months ago, who was new to the agency, described, how much they try to refuse to be transparent. They're hiding issues like this within their own ranks. I'll also just say, when I saw this come out, and I agree with you, that reporter and the Texas Observer is doing fantastic reporting right now. What's also so important for, I think, the public to understand, which the reporting itself indicates, but this is someone who was sitting in immigration court hearings making decisions, like potentially life and death decisions about families. And as the reporter describes, and I've sat in these courtrooms, I've spent 15 years doing research on the immigration enforcement system, and he would have been sitting there on his phone, which you can see. I've sat in these courtrooms as well. And even though this is an example of something obviously very serious, something that's much more rampant is not just the white supremacy, but just widespread indifference. I've sat there in immigration court with attorneys lots of different attorneys who they'll just surf the internet. They'll be on sports sites. Like, they're not really paying attention to what's going on. And I think all of that together helps to paint a picture of a system that's just bias towards immigrants. They can sit there and cruise on Twitter and cruise on their, ESPN web pages and just look around, and people get deported. It's not even just about the individuals. It's just the systems that are, really skewed against migrants, unfortunately.
Yeah, just casually ruining people's lives and breaking up families without much of a thought. And it's the dehumanization that starts from the top about immigrants that results in that kind of ideology, but also the more under the radar indifference that you described to their pain and suffering. And people often describe our immigration system as broken, and even Democrats, who I'm very frustrated with, not providing a positive vision for what fixing our immigration system could look like outside of just militarizing our border and doing the same thing but a little bit more nicely. What is broken about our immigration system, and what really needs to be fixed as opposed to more militarization and more pain and suffering?
Sure. So I think the language about having a broken immigration system, I think it's really important because it is a kind of way for people, regardless of their, maybe individual views on it. I think a lot of people do agree that there's something with the immigration system that's not working. It's not working because we don't have a system that responds to our economic needs. The truth is, many of our core industries in this country rely on immigrant labor, and we haven't had revisions to labor migration in almost 30 years, since the 1990s. We also have, we're several decades in now to globalization, and frankly, families just don't live within countries. I mean, we have lots of families look a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of families and relationships across borders. And unfortunately, our immigration system still makes it hard for families to get together and stay together. And so we just haven't really responded to those kinds of needs. At the same time, there are some of us in the academic and world, and even some other writers and intellectuals who also try to point out that in some ways the immigration system is not broken. It's doing what it was designed to do in some senses, which is our current immigration system was born out of the racism of the late 1800s and early 1900s. It's long been a system that's been exploited to hurt immigrant workers, to build in false competition and false animosity among working people. I come from a working family in rural Ohio, and the idea, when I grew up, my dad did construction work, and I grew up with workers that would migrate up to Ohio from Kentucky and from West Virginia for work, the same way that migrants come from parts of Mexico and Central America for work. And so, we should be able to understand that we actually have a lot in common as people, but the immigration system creates these artificial boundaries that ultimately really just serves, people who are owning, people who have a lot of power already, and people like Musk, who's, he has not only relied on labor, who's not in the country, under worker visas, but also fought unionization efforts. So the immigration system just has this long history of building in divisions and animosity that divide us rather than bring us together, and it still does that, unfortunately. So so it is both broken, and yet it is broken by design.
And is that design as simple as I want leverage over my workforce and I can pay them a sub-minimum wage and not give them overtime, and I don't have to worry as much about them joining a union, and maybe I can hire someone who's 14 and not have to worry about that? Is that really the theme we should take away from this?
I mean, it's certainly one aspect of it. It's not, a lot's changed in the last 20 or 30 years. There's just been a lot more humanitarian migration and family-based migration, globally speaking. This isn't a US story. This is really a global story. I think there was one point in our history where there was in some sense, workers really exploited undocumented labor to sort of break up unions and to undermine collective organizing in some way. And so there was, that was used. I think for the most part, organized labor and labor unions have recognized that actually we have much more in common and it's better to work together.
I meant for the bosses, that
Sure.
they don't have to, they want a labor class of folks that they can more easily deny wages to and subjugate, and it helps them with their other workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw this. I was one of the co-founders of a worker center back in Ohio, and we did that kind of work, and we saw that. And sometimes it's not even just the wages themselves that are lower, but it's actually just the expendability of these workers who, as you said, maybe they don't have to pay them as much, but even more importantly, these are workers who are scared about raising workplace violations and pushing back and organizing. So absolutely.
Yeah, it's you could just threaten to deport somebody if, say they're being sexually harassed or they have unsafe work conditions. So I guess that brings us really to where we're at right now with Donald Trump and his immigration race. Well, firstly, before we move to the present day, in terms of fixing the immigration system, wouldn't our resources be better allocated to some of what the Biden administration was starting to do at the end, like that app where people could apply more easily and put their information and data, which would be verified, into a system as they await an immigration court, which still needs massive improvements as well, but just making it so that it's a formal process as opposed to like, we're going to put razor wire in the Rio Grande so a pregnant woman drowns to death.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a thing that's a strategy that's been tried and true across the last 20 years is give people a legal pathway to register and come in, and they will do it every time. Even when that system is imperfect, even when they still have to wait in dangerous parts of northern Mexico, if they know that there is a pathway, they'll do it. They'll do it the right way. They'll wait. They'll submit the information they need. Because they're interested in complying. They're interested in coming in the right way. That's simply the reality for everyone. But again, we have a visa system where we have artificial restrictions on how many visas we can offer. So there's people with family members in the United States who are effectively forced to wait for 10, 20, 25 years to just come, quote, the right way. And if you have to, if you're a parent or if you're a child and you're thinking, well, am I going to watch my kid grow up, or am I going to watch my parent grow old and just wait for 25 years to come, or I'm going to go some other pathway? People will go the other pathway because the ties towards family and the commitment to family is always going to be greater than, what some piece of paper says in Washington. And so that's just sort of the reality. It's very pragmatic. And just a final point here. By the way, this was the Republican position for 30 years, up until the campaign, the 1999 2000 presidential campaign. The position of the Republican Party was, why are we engaging in this big government control and practices when we should just, the Wall Street Journal said in the 1980s, why don't we have open borders? So there's been a massive flip.
Yeah, there really has. It's accelerated by the Trump administration, though, because of the Build the Wall in 2016. In 2012, after Romney lost, there was a mea culpa, or at least it looked like they were trying to attempt one within the Republican Party. We've got to change our rhetoric on immigration. We've got to be more open to Latino voters. And even despite what Trump's rhetoric, they did succeed this last election. He gained with Latino voters.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.